The First World War ignited an explosive leap in aviation technology. What began with fragile biplanes photographing enemy positions quickly evolved into a race to create aircraft for every conceivable battlefield role. Fighters, bombers, scouts, and eventually machines built specifically to strike targets on the ground. One such aircraft was the Sopwith Salamander, developed for the Royal Air Force in the final stages of the war. Intended as a heavily protected, low-flying attacker, the Salamander was delivered too late to see combat, though several were assigned to squadrons for evaluation just before the armistice. In the post-war years, a small number continued to serve with RAF units stationed in British territories, remaining in limited use until at least 1922. The Salamander is also remembered for another distinction. It was among the first RAF aircraft, quite possibly the very first, to be officially finished in a camouflage scheme. By the final years of the First World War, the RAF had begun using single-engine fighters in a new and dangerous role, attacking enemy trenches at low altitude. This improvised tactic emerged during the Battle of Ypres and Cambrai in 1917. The aircraft pressed into this role were typically machines that had failed as dogfighters or suffered from design flaws that limited their usefulness elsewhere. Though never designed for the role, these so-called trench fighters marked the earliest step towards what would eventually become the dedicated ground attack and close air support aircraft category. In early 1918, the Sopwith Aviation Company began experimenting with aircraft specifically designed for trench warfare. Their first attempt was a modified version of the famous Sopwith Camel, designated the TF-1 Camel, with TF standing for Trench Fighter. This prototype received additional armour and was intended to rake enemy trenches with machine gun fire or drop small bombs during low-level passes. However, the TF-1 Camel served only as a test bed. It demonstrated the concept, but it was never meant for mass production or frontline service. At the same time, the RAF was seeking an aircraft capable of mounting a more powerful engine than the Camel's frame could support. Sopwith, therefore, turned to their newly developed Snipe fighter, created in late 1917 as the Camel's successor. Although the Snipe would not enter widespread service until September 1918, and saw only 3 months of combat before the armistice, it offered a stronger, more modern airframe for further development. Official work on a trench fighter variant of the Snipe began in January 1918. The new design held several advantages over the earlier TF-1, being more agile, sturdier, and capable of carrying the powerful 230 horsepower Bentley BR2 rotary engine. 3 core priorities guided the development of the aircraft: engine, performance, armour protection, and armament. A rotary engine was selected over an inline type because it could be more easily enclosed within an armoured cowling, giving the aircraft far better protection against ground fire. Early armament proposals called for 1 forward-firing Vickers machine gun paired with 2 downward-firing guns intended to rake enemy trenches. This arrangement proved too complex and was eventually abandoned in favour of a simpler and far more reliable setup of 2 standard forward-firing Vickers guns. To further improve survivability, Sopwith designers built the entire front section of the fuselage as a heavily armoured box, protecting both the pilot and the engine from rifle and machine gun fire during low-level attacks. Construction of 3 prototypes began in late January 1918, and by April the first airworthy example was completed. By then, the new trench fighter had also received its official name, the Sopwith TF-2 Salamander. The Salamander was among the very first aircraft designed specifically for ground attack operations. Although it shared many components with the Sopwith Snipe, the new aircraft incorporated several distinctive features tailored to its demanding battlefield role. The wings were of 2-bay construction, built around a wooden frame and covered with fabric. The fuselage was also wooden and fabric covered, but unlike the Snipe's rounded contours, the Salamander used flat fuselage sides. This change simplified manufacturing and made it easier to install the armoured plates. Power came from a 230 horsepower Bentley BR2 air-cooled rotary engine mounted at the nose. Both the engine and cockpit were enclosed within a heavily armoured box designed to protect the aircraft's most vital components from ground fire. This armoured shell was 8mm thick at the front, 6mm along the sides and 11mm on the floor, with an additional armoured cowling covering the engine itself. Much of the cockpit layout and control system was carried over from the Snipe, though the Salamander added an armoured headrest fairing behind the pilot for extra protection. The main undercarriage was positioned beneath the cockpit, and flight testing quickly revealed that the added weight of the armour made the aircraft challenging to land. As a result, the landing gear had to be reinforced during development. The fuselage tapered toward the rear into a conventional tailplane, supported by a simple tail skid. Early prototypes used wire bracing for the tailplane, but this arrangement proved insufficient for the aircraft's heavier structure. It was soon replaced by 4 sturdy steel tubes. The Salamander's armament went through several design iterations before engineers settled on the final layout. The production configuration featured 2 synchronized Vickers machine guns, offset slightly from one another to make room for enlarged ammunition boxes, each holding 1,000 rounds. Earlier proposals had been far more ambitious. One called for 8 downward-firing guns, while another combined 2 downward-facing Lewis guns with 2 additional guns mounted above the centerline. However, no photographs or surviving documentation confirm that any of these experimental arrangements were ever built or tested. For its ground attack role, the Salamander could carry up to 4 9-kilogram bombs, or alternatively a single 51-kilogram bomb, giving it a modest strike capability against entrenched enemy positions. The Salamander made its first flight on 27th of April at Brooklands. The prototype initially shared its mainplanes, ailerons and tail control surfaces with the early production Sopwith Snipe, though these components were later refined on production aircraft. Many of the improvements mirrored those introduced on the Snipe, including an enlarged rudder to provide better directional control. On the 9th of May, the first Salamander prototype was sent to France for service testing. However, accounts of its subsequent fate vary. Some sources report that it returned to England on the 30th of June for further evaluation at Martlesham Heath, while others claim the aircraft was lost in a crash in France in May. It is possible that this confusion arose from the loss of the third prototype, which is known to have crashed at an unknown later date. By this time, the remaining 2 prototypes had been completed. Flight tests showed that the Salamander performed well overall, but the controls were found to be somewhat sluggish, largely due to the added weight of its armour plating. The aircraft also faced its share of criticism. Several pilots complained about the slower response of the controls, and some questioned the entire concept of an armoured aircraft, calling it a waste of resources. Many critics judged the Salamander by the standards of a conventional fighter, overlooking its intended role as a dedicated ground attack aircraft. They argued that its armour made it too cumbersome for dogfighting, even though it was never designed for such a role. A total of 6 prototypes were originally planned, although the final 3 were ultimately cancelled. The third prototype introduced a revised armament layout with staggered machine guns to accommodate the Salamander's larger ammunition boxes, a configuration adopted on all subsequent production models. With flight testing showing promising results, an initial order for 500 Salamanders was placed in the early summer of 1918, and Sopwith began building the type alongside the Snipe. Production aircraft incorporated several improvements over the prototypes, including the enlarged tail fin and rudder, production standard Snipe ailerons, and the staggered gun arrangement first tested on the third prototype. As 1918 progressed, output steadily increased. The original order of 500 aircraft soon grew to 600, and by the final months of the war the number had expanded to 1,400. In practice, however, the Salamander proved far more difficult to manufacture than the Snipe. Much of this stemmed from the complexity of its electrical wiring and the extra labour required to build the armoured cockpit section. Before long, problems also began to emerge with the armour itself. The armoured box forming the front fuselage was prone to warping over time, which in turn caused distortion in the surrounding airframe. This flaw went undetected during wartime production, but it became a persistent problem in many early post-war examples. In October, production salamanders began receiving distinctive, disruptive camouflage patterns. This marked one of the earliest instances in which the Royal Air Force officially applied camouflage paint to its aircraft, something that would become standard practice during the Second World War. By early November, 2 salamanders were sent over and stationed in France, with one being assigned to No. 86 Squadron at Falempin. No. 86 Squadron had just been assigned as a dedicated ground attack unit when it arrived. Back in Britain, Squadrons No. 95 at Weighton and No. 157 at Upper Heyford were also reworked to be dedicated trench-fighting squadrons and equipped with 5 salamanders each. No. 157 Squadron was scheduled to leave for the front on November 21st. However, the signing of the armistice on 11th November abruptly ended all plans for the Salamander's frontline deployment. With hostilities over, there was no more need for a specialised trench attack aircraft. The scheduled deployment of Salamander-equipped squadrons was cancelled, and the large production order was quickly scaled back. Sopwith and Glendower continued limited manufacturing into mid-1919, after which production ceased entirely. Other contracted firms either stopped work immediately or completed only a handful of additional airframes after the armistice. Had the war dragged on into 1919, the Salamander was expected to enter full operational service. 13 squadrons were projected to be equipped with the type in France by May of that year. Because Bentley engine production was not expected to meet demand, 5 of those squadrons were slated to receive aircraft fitted with Clerget engines instead. The exact number of Salamanders built is still uncertain, as records vary between sources. The most frequently cited figure is 210 completed aircraft, though some accounts suggest total production may have been as high as 500. After the war, the Sopwith Salamander failed to gain much traction, as several significant design flaws quickly became apparent. One of the most serious problems was the tendency of its armour plating to warp, a defect that affected many early production aircraft and led to structural distortion over time. Another issue emerged when it was discovered that the first 70 Salamanders had been fitted with upper wings originally intended for the Sopwith Snipe. These were not strong enough to support the Salamander's substantially greater weight, therefore making the aircraft extremely dangerous to fly. It was not until December 1918 that the problem was fully recognised and corrected. Most Salamanders produced after the armistice were immediately placed into storage upon completion. Although flight testing continued until 1920, genuine interest in the type had largely vanished by mid-1919. There are records suggesting that one Salamander was painted in a lozenge-style camouflage pattern, similar to that used on German aircraft, for testing at Farnborough in July 1919. However, no photographs of this aircraft are known to exist, and it is likely that any significant results came from the trials. Despite waning enthusiasm, the Salamander did see limited post-war service with several RAF squadrons, though the details are sparse. The latest known mention of the type in RAF use refers to a unit stationed in Egypt in 1922. A few examples were also sent abroad for evaluation. One Salamander was tested by the French Aeronautical Technical Section at Villacoublay, while another was shipped to the United States for trials with the US Army Air Service. No further interest followed from the Americans, and the sole example remained at McCook Field as late as 1926. Photographs of this aircraft show a warning stencil beneath the cockpit reading, "This machine is not to be flown," suggesting that it too suffered from the notorious warping problem. Unlike many First World War aircraft that found a second life in civilian hands or on the airshow circuit, the Salamander was too specialised and lacked the speed and appeal of contemporary fighters. With its original purpose obsolete and no clear future ahead, the Salamander quietly faded from service as newer designs took its place. Ultimately, all were scrapped and none are known to survive today. This concludes our look at the Sopwith TF2 Salamander, the British aircraft designed specifically for ground attack missions against German trenches during the First World War. What are your thoughts on this concept? Do you think the Salamander's combination of armour and armament made it well suited for the role it was intended to fill? And would you like to see more aircraft designs from this era covered in future videos? Let us know in the comments below. If you like what we do and want to see more, remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single video. Also, don't forget to take a look at our extensive collection of articles on our website, plane-encyclopedia.com. Thank you, and see you next time.